My name is Emma Prescott, 34 years old, once an interior architect living in Austin, Texas. But that day, I was nothing more than a wife left standing in the middle of a dried-out field stretching to the horizon, under the scorching sun of the western suburbs. No phone, no wallet, not a single car in sight. I stood there in a thin dress, muddy high heels, watching my husband's black SUV speed away like he'd never known me. Inside were his closest friends, the ones who had toasted me at our wedding. They all burst into laughter. Caleb turned his head through the window and shouted, "Let's see how you manage on your own. You're smart, right?" Any woman who's ever been labeled a killjoy, just for not drinking or not laughing the way men expect, might understand that moment. It wasn't just my body that got left behind but also my trust, my dignity. What hurt even more was realizing Caleb had planned it all. He was trying to declare me legally missing, to take full control of everything we built together. What would you do if the one who once swore to love you was quietly planning to erase you from your own life? Leave a comment if you've ever felt betrayed by the person closest to you. Hit like if you believe women don't need saving, just the strength to rise. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to hear the rest of the journey Caleb never saw coming. I still remember the feeling of that dry breeze brushing across my face when Caleb took my hand and led me out of the main barn where the party was being held. "You should get some fresh air, clear your head," he said casually, but his eyes were cold, irritated. I didn't say anything. Throughout the party, he'd already had 3 drinks with his buddies, all loud, bragging men who always looked at me like an unfortunate accessory to Caleb, not a person. I never wanted to be there in the first place. It was Caleb's company's so-called team building weekend, a chance for them to drink, party, and talk real estate deals. There was no space for me. I wasn't formally invited. Caleb just said vaguely, "Tag along for fun." That evening, when I refused a glass of vodka offered by a guy named Bryce and politely asked for water instead, I could tell Caleb was starting to lose patience. "You always make things heavy," he snapped. "It's just one drink. Lighten up." I didn't want to argue, so I quietly stood up and walked to the back of the barn. He followed right after. Then, with a half-hearted hug, he told me to stay out here for a bit, breathe in the country air. I nodded. The air out there was colder than I expected. The lights from inside flickered through the cracks, the laughter still echoing, then fading. I turned back just a few minutes later. The door was shut. At that moment, I didn't realize what was going on. I walked around. The parking lot was empty. The entire place had gone silent, as if everyone had vanished at once. "Caleb," I called, feeling lightheaded. I ran toward the dirt road that led to the highway, hoping he was waiting somewhere. But there was only darkness and fields stretching wide like they could swallow my voice. The nearest streetlight was miles away, and the only response I got was the sound of insects. I frantically checked my purse. Empty. My heart started pounding. I remembered handing Caleb my wallet and phone earlier because my dress had no pockets. What seemed like a small act now felt like the perfect trap. I had nothing. I tried to stay calm, but fear slowly crept into every fingertip. Dark clouds began rolling in from the west. The sky felt like it was pressing down with something I couldn't name. And then rain. Not a downpour. Just cold enough. Enough to soak through my thin dress. I hugged myself tightly and began walking through the muddy trail. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew if I stopped, I would fall. And I couldn't let that happen. My muddy heels made every step painful. I took them off, carried them in one hand, and walked barefoot across rough grass and gravel. I had designed hundreds of luxury homes, chosen stone pavers for people's patios, but never imagined walking barefoot across that same material through an empty field. I started to tremble. Not just from the cold, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel like Emma anymore. I wasn't the woman who could call an Uber home. I wasn't Caleb's polished, quiet wife at networking events. I was someone who had been left behind. On purpose. In the distance, I spotted a faint light. An old pickup truck was parked by the roadside. My heart nearly burst. I ran toward it, waving, shouting in the rain. "Please, help me." The truck door creaked open like a scene out of an old western. An older man, silver-haired, wearing a cowboy hat, looked at me with a mix of surprise and caution. I understood. I probably looked unhinged, soaked, barefoot, no ID, no phone. I got left behind, I said hoarsely. My husband, they all left. Without warning. Without. He didn't ask more. Just nodded for me to climb into the cab. The seat smelled of old cigarettes and sweat. But at that moment, it felt like the plushest seat in the world. What's your name? He asked after a quiet moment. Emma, I croaked, my voice nearly gone from the cold. He nodded slowly. I'm Roy. There's a gas station about 15 miles from here. You got someone to call? I hesitated and realized I didn't have anyone to call. No phone. No one's number memorized. Close friends. Caleb had gradually pulled me away from them over the years. Family? I hadn't spoken to my parents since I got married. I'm not sure, I whispered. Roy didn't say another word. He turned on the radio, letting soft blues music fill the damp silence. When we pulled up to an old gas station in the middle of nowhere, I got out, feet still, sore and bleeding. Roy went inside, spoke quietly to the woman behind the counter, then came back with a dry towel and a steaming cup of coffee. I sat on the wooden bench out front, the warmth from the cup slowly easing into my hands. The night stretched on. And I couldn't have imagined. This was only the beginning of a journey I never thought I'd have to take. Roy let me crash on the old couch in the back of the gas station, where he lived in a small room next door. No one asked more questions. They just looked at me with a blend of curiosity and caution, like I was a strange dream someone had stepped out of. I borrowed an old flannel shirt Roy handed me, then curled up in the little kitchen lit by a single yellow bulb. On the table sat an old Toshiba laptop, its screen scratched, a few keys missing. But it was the one thing I needed most right then. Mind if I check my email? I asked softly. Go ahead, Roy said, still flipping through oil receipts. I sat down and typed in my usual password. Wrong. I tried again. Then again. All 3 times denied. The password had been changed. I moved to my bank account. Also denied. I tried logging into the internal app we'd used to track our mortgage. No access. Every account I was tied to had either been locked or had its permissions changed. I sat still, numb. Finally, I opened another tab and tried logging into an old work email I used years ago. Thankfully, it still worked. In the inbox was one message, urgent legal notice. Emma Prescott. I clicked it open. It was from Mitchell and Blaine, the law firm in Austin where Caleb and I had signed our prenup. The subject line hit me like a hammer. Petition for asset control due to legal disappearance. Case #twatwo to 8457. P. A chill ran down my spine. Caleb had filed a court petition declaring me legally missing so he could take over all our assets. I read every line. The attached documents described me as absent from home since the 4th of last month and no known contact with family, friends, or employer. They even attached an old photo of me smiling in a white dress on a street with a note. Missing, possibly emotionally unstable. Needs urgent locating. I nearly threw up. That photo was taken in San Antonio last fall. Caleb had taken it. Now he was using it to build a lie in court. I searched the state court's website, entered the case number. Caleb's name stood proudly under remaining legal representative. A highlighted note below read, in process of transferring real estate assets, including the home in Travis County. I leaned back in the chair. No more crying. No more anger. Just a vast emptiness. Caleb hadn't just left me in a field. He had planned this. A full sweep. Erase me. Take the assets. And turn me into someone who no longer existed. You all right? Roy asked, setting a hot cup of tea beside me. I looked at him and just nodded. I need to call home, I said, walking to the old landline phone on the counter. I dialed our home number, the landline we'd had since our wedding. This number is no longer in service, the message said. I tried Caleb's cell. The number you have dialed is unreachable. I called 2 of my old closest friends, Lisa and Morgan. Straight to voicemail. I had no one left. Roy looked at me for a long moment and then said gently, you don't have to say a word. But if you need a place to stay tonight, I got a small room out back. Old, but clean. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. I turned away, wiped them with my sleeve and nodded quietly. The room out back was no bigger than a kitchen, with a metal bed frame, a worn-out mattress, a chipped wooden desk, and a ceiling fan that clanked with every turn. But that night, it was the only place I could curl up without fear of being erased again. I lay still, staring at the dim ceiling, listening to the rain ticking against the window, and began piecing together everything from the past 6 months. The times Caleb told me, "You should stop working and just take care of the house." The moments he urged me to remove your name from the investment account, it's easier if I manage it. The way I pulled away from friendships because he said my friends weren't a good influence. Each piece, old and worn, suddenly fit perfectly into a picture I had never dared to face before. I had been erased little by little, gently, subtly, until I was nothing but a shadow beside my husband. And now he'd deleted the rest. On paper, online, in life. I had only one thing left, the name Emma Prescott. And even that was slowly disappearing from the legal records of the state of Texas. But what Caleb didn't know was, I still existed. I was breathing. I could see him clearly for who he truly was. And I wasn't going to let this disappearance become permanent. I left the gas station the next morning, carrying an old backpack Mr. Roy had dug up from storage and a few simple clothes his wife had left behind years ago. In one hand, I held a warm cup of coffee and a sheet of paper listing the freight truck schedules heading west. Mr. Roy didn't ask where I planned to go. He simply said, "If you need time, take it. And when you want to come back, my door's still open." I hitched a ride on an old produce truck, hopping from one small town to the next. Each time the truck stopped to unload, I made use of roadside restrooms to wash my hair under cold water and scrub the dust off the hems of my jeans. I didn't have a set plan. But one name kept circling in my mind. Silver Creek. It was a town on the edge of New Mexico I had once visited 2 years ago, back when I worked on a community center design project for a nonprofit. I'd spent 3 months mapping land use, evaluating public spaces, and brainstorming ideas for an outdoor reading garden with Ruthie, the local librarian. But the project had never been finished. Caleb had said back then, "You don't need to throw yourself into dusty places like that anymore. We're not hurting for money." So I had walked away. Now, the very place he called dusty was the first that came to mind when I needed a place to start over. I stepped off the truck in the late afternoon. Silver Creek looked just like I remembered, quiet, simple, red dirt roads winding past small wooden houses and bushes of soft lavender in bloom. The sun bathed the metal rooftops in gold, and the sound of mourning doves echoed like a wordless symphony. I walked past the small town square, where a weathered sign read, "Silver Creek Public Library, established 1914. The glass door, painted green and chipped at the edges, still bore the mark where my fingers had once rested. Inside, the smell of aged paper and old timber hadn't changed. I stepped in, my heart pounding. A silver-haired woman behind the front desk looked up from a stack of books. She wore a full-length dress, a thin cardigan draped across her shoulders, and reading glasses resting on the bridge of her nose. Her eyes paused for a few seconds when she saw me. "Emma?" Ruthie squinted. I nodded, throat tightening. I didn't think you'd remember me. You think I'd forget the woman who designed the spiral reading garden." She chuckled, setting the books down. "Come here, sweetheart." I stepped forward, tears welling as she wrapped her arms around me like family long lost. Ruthie led me into the small back room behind the library, the space where she took her afternoon tea. I sat down on a wicker chair by the window, watching sunlight filter through lace curtains, feeling my heart grow still. "You've lost weight," she said, pouring tea into a cup. "What happened?" I hesitated. I didn't know where to begin. But eventually I spoke. Not everything, just enough. How I was abandoned in a field, cut off from all contact, declared legally missing. I didn't mention Caleb. I wasn't ready. She didn't interrupt. Just sat beside me, lightly resting her hand on mine. "Do you have anywhere to go?" she asked when I finished. I shook my head. "Then you'll stay here. At least for a while," she said as if it were the most natural thing. The upstairs room's still there. Just needs a little tidying. I didn't know when the tears started falling again. That night, I lay in the attic room with its low ceiling and arched window looking out toward the distant mountains. The wind blew gently through the gaps in the wooden frame, carrying the scent of dry earth and pine. A thick brown blanket covered me, and in my hands was the old sketchbook Ruthie had saved, the one I'd left behind. "I kept it," she said, "because I believed you'd come back to finish the project someday." I closed the sketchbook and rested it on my chest. I slept deeply. No nightmares. No waking up gasping for air, unsure of where I was. The next morning, I helped Ruthie clean the library. She handed me a ring of keys, one slightly tarnished in brass. "Your room key. And the back door to the library. In case you want to slip out early and not wake me." I took it, my hands trembling. Not from fear. From gratitude. In a place where I thought I was just a stranger, someone still remembered me and welcomed me home. At noon, I sat alone on a stone bench beside the lavender fence. Sunlight poured over my shoulders as I flipped open the sketchbook to the first page. Old drawings stared back at me, a concept for a public garden, outdoor reading space with a timber canopy and curved benches shaded by old trees. I pulled out a pencil. No hesitation. My hand began to move. Redrawing it from scratch. Softer lines. Stronger foundation. Not trying to please anyone. No Caleb hovering, criticizing. Just me. I didn't know what lay ahead. But I knew that right here in Silver Creek, I had found a place to breathe. A place to begin again. And this time, I wouldn't stop halfway. I started over with $32 in the pocket of a worn jacket, 2 calloused hands and a new name, Emily Rivers. Silver Creek was small enough to walk around in a single morning. But that smallness made the hearts of its people more open. In the afternoons helping Ruthie with library books, I overheard that the corner cafe was looking for early morning help. The owner, June, was in her 50s, once a baker in Santa Fe, now running the shop with her daughter after losing her husband. I applied on a foggy morning. June looked me over without too many questions. "You know how to bake?" she asked. "I studied it. Never professionally. But I learn fast." She nodded. "Be here at 6 tomorrow. Aprons in the kitchen." I bowed my head in thanks. On the way back to the library, I stopped by the old tailor shop at the edge of town, spent $15 on 2 second-hand shirts and a pair of jeans. My clothes from Texas were too worn to salvage. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman named Myra, touched my hand as she took the cash. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Rivers." It was the first time someone called me by my new name. Emily Rivers. No longer Emma Prescott. No longer Caleb's wife. No longer the woman listed as missing in the state court records filed by his lawyer in Texas. I arrived at the cafe before dawn. The smell of freshly ground coffee and baking flour wrapped around me like a blanket. June taught me how to make corn muffins and old-fashioned cinnamon twists, using her mother's recipes. My hands, once used to pencils and color palettes, now learned to knead by feel and time. I burned the first tray of banana bread, tops cracked, the inside still raw. I looked at June, apologetic, but she just gave a crooked smile. "Next time, less milk, more flour. That oven's hotter than you think." Inside the cafe, I kept a sketchbook. During breaks, I drew every detail of the town: the arched library window, the stone bench by the bus stop, the ivy climbing Myra's porch. I drew like someone making up for lost time. Ruthie peeked at my sketches one day and said, "An architect's hands never sleep for long." I looked up, about to reply, but she had already walked off, leaving me in silence and a strange swell of feeling. Life was simple, but complete. I worked mornings at the cafe, afternoons at the library, evenings sketching under the attic roof. I kept my identity hidden, using Emily Rivers with everyone, even to open a local bank account for my wages. Sometimes guilt would nudge at me for hiding the truth, but caution was the only thing keeping me safe. One Saturday afternoon, while wiping tables, I overheard customers at the counter talking about a stranger in town. Tall guy. Sunglasses. Looked like one of those city types. Said he's looking for a missing woman. I didn't turn. But my heart stopped. Did he say her name? Someone asked. No. Just said he's looking for his wife. Brown hair, skinny, mid-30s. Might have changed her name. I kept wiping the table, hands moving as if nothing had changed. But inside, a storm raged. I knew Caleb wouldn't stop. Not out of love. Not out of guilt. But because I still held the deed to a lakeside property near Lake Travis, where land value was skyrocketing. A piece of land I'd inherited from my grandmother. Caleb had tried every trick to get me to sign it over. I never did. And now, with no legal path to forge my name, he needed to find me at any cost. That evening, I left the cafe early, taking side streets and avoiding the busy plaza. I stopped at the pharmacy, bought a new SIM card, and quietly created an email account under a name I'd never used before, Aaron, Archives 24. I needed to reach out to Harper Dean, the only lawyer I still trusted. Harper and I had gone to architecture school together. She had messaged me several times after I vanished. I had never responded. But now I needed her. I wrote a short email. I didn't reveal my location. I just made it clear I was safe, but Caleb was searching for me because of a financial asset. I attached a scanned copy of the court filing declaring me missing, and asked her, if I chose to resurface, could I reclaim my legal identity and rights? Just 5 minutes later, Harper replied. Emma, thank God. I thought something terrible had happened to you. Say nothing more. Don't show your face. I'll handle the legal end from here. But if he's hired a private investigator, you need to be absolutely cautious. And, Emma, do you know how much the land under your name is currently valued at? $710,000. That's what he wants. Not you. I closed my laptop. The night in Silver Creek suddenly felt colder than usual. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew I was no longer alone. And I was no longer the woman who once stood silently in front of a luxurious building, in Austin, waiting for her husband to come out so she could ask what they were having for dinner. 2 days later, while I was cleaning the pastry shelf at the cafe, June walked over quietly, her face unusually tense. A strange man came looking for you this morning, she said softly. He didn't come into the shop but stood on the sidewalk staring at the menu board, then asked a few locals. I froze. What did he ask? He showed a picture of a woman. Black and white, a little blurry. Asked if anyone had seen her around here. Said she was his missing wife. Mentally unstable. Name was Emma. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breathing turned heavy. Did you say anything? June gently placed her hand on my shoulder. I told him there's only an Emily Rivers around here. I don't know any Emma. But, don't walk alone at night anymore, okay? I nodded, feeling a chill spread across my palms. That man was definitely the private investigator Caleb had hired. He'd found me. That night, after closing the cafe, I walked quickly to the library. Main Street was still lit, but the houses on both sides had gone dark. I took the small path in the back, used the spare key to open the rear door of the library, locked it carefully behind me, then climbed to the attic room. I opened my laptop. A reply from Harper had arrived. Emma, I just confirmed. Caleb submitted forged documents at the Travis County Notary Office. He claimed you were mentally unfit, legally incapacitated, and signed a property transfer form on your behalf. The form was temporarily approved, but I've filed an emergency objection. If you don't come forward within 14 days, his claim to ownership will be finalized. I need you to sign a power of attorney form to grant me full legal representation. Print it out, sign it, and scan it back as soon as possible. You don't have to reveal your identity publicly, just send it through the secure system I've attached. I clicked the link, filled in my real name, Emma Prescott. My hands were slick with sweat as I typed. I'd spent months hiding from this name. Now I had to write it down, officially, in a legal document. I signed the form, scanned it with the camera, and sent it back. The laptop light blinked, as the data encrypted and uploaded to Harper's private server. I sat there for a long while, staring at the black screen as if I could read the future in it. The next morning, when I stepped out of the library for work, Ruthie was already waiting by the door. You saw him, she said. Not a question, just a statement. I didn't answer, just nodded slightly. She held my hand, tighter than usual. Do you want to leave this place? I looked at her and shook my head. I'm not running anymore. She gave a faint, sad smile. Then I'll stand behind you. That afternoon, Harper video called me. Her familiar face appeared on the screen, black hair tied up, round glasses, and that piercing gaze still as sharp as ever. You holding up okay? I'm fine. At least not falling apart. Harper tilted her head. Caleb's trying to fast-track the sale of the Travis Lake lot. But no one's willing to sign a contract without clear confirmation from you. He started putting pressure on the notary office, even filing a counterclaim saying you're avoiding civil responsibilities. I gave a bitter laugh. He wants to turn me into a shadow, easier to control. Not just that. Harper leaned down, pulled out a stack of documents. I dug through past notary records. He tried to do the same to his ex-wife, someone named Rachel Granger. Filed a missing person report, faked medical records, forged property transfer papers. But she returned just in time before being wiped from the system. I choked up. I didn't know he'd been married before. Because he erased everything. Very professionally. But not without mistakes. I sat silent, an unsettling realization swelling inside me. Caleb wasn't just a toxic husband. He was a calculated predator. I need you to confirm one more thing, Harper continued. The Travis Lake property, have you ever signed anything related to transferring, mortgaging, or authorizing it? I shook my head firmly. Never. I kept the original paperwork, stored at my parents' house in San Marcos. It's an inheritance from my grandmother. I never gave Caleb access to it. Then he's completely forging it. Good. We've got grounds for criminal counteraction. Harper ended the call after promising to send additional legal forms. I sat quietly in the attic, listening to the ceiling fan spin gently above. I once thought Caleb was just an angry, controlling man. But now I understood more clearly. He was a strategist capable of crafting an entire legal narrative to erase me from existence. But I was still here. In a small town where people remembered your face, called you by name, and believed in the honesty of a handshake. I was no longer the Emma from years ago. And if Caleb wanted to keep playing this game, he'd have to face a completely different woman. One who had walked through darkness and didn't collapse. I found that old house on an early spring afternoon, when the wind was still cold, but the sun was warm enough to make the rotting fence look a little less grim. It sat near the southern edge of Silver Creek, about a 15-minute walk from the library, hidden behind aging birch trees and a tangle of wild grapevines creeping over the porch. The house had been abandoned for nearly 10 years, after its previous owner passed without any clear air. A section of the roof had caved in, the wooden floors were rotten, and one window was shattered. But I saw something different. I saw afternoon light flooding that left corner where I could set a desk. I imagined a white wall covered in sketches, a small bookshelf near the kitchen, and old wooden chairs painted indigo for the local kids to sit and draw. I went to see Mr. Joe, the local land manager. No one wants to touch that place, he said, lifting his glasses and squinting at me through decades of dust. You want to do something with it, go ahead. Just don't burn it down. I laughed. I just want to fix it up, turn it into a little studio. I can't afford rent, but I'm willing to put in the work. If the town needs help with anything, Mr. Joe waved me off. Miss Rivers, someone like you is the best thing to happen to this sleepy town in years. Go for it. So I began. I worked mornings at the cafe, then cleaned the house in the afternoons. At first, it was just me with a plastic bucket, a broom, and a pair of gloves June lent me. But slowly, others joined. Ruthie brought over leftover white paint from the library. A 12-year-old girl named Haley brought her drawings and asked if I could teach her how to mix colors. A part-time carpenter named Darnell helped fix the back door in exchange for a cup of hot coffee and a promise that I'd help him design a guitar shelf. I had no money, but I had time, hands, and knowledge skills. Caleb once dismissed as useless in real life. I rebuilt every window frame, repainted every wall. While working, I heard stories that had long gone quiet. A retired teacher who'd always dreamed of teaching art but had no space. A third-grade boy obsessed with Legos but never guided on space and structure. A widower who brought stacks of garden shed sketches he'd never dared show anyone. I started a Saturday afternoon class called Living Spaces, Dreaming Spaces. I printed a few simple flyers and hung them at the library and the pharmacy. 3 days later, 11 kids showed up for the first session. I taught them to draw floor plans of their dream rooms using rulers and recycled paper. Showed them how to turn toilet paper rolls into columns, bottle caps into ceiling lights. Their creativity stunned me. "Miss Emily," one boy named Lucas asked, "can a bedroom have a slide in it?" I nodded. On paper, anything is possible. Weeks later, a local journalist named Nina, whose cousin was in my class, came by for an interview. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Recorder on." "From a place where women forgot they once had dreams," I answered calmly. Nina went quiet, then asked, "Are you afraid people will find out who you really are?" I looked at her, smiling. "Do you think I'm not myself just because I don't live in Austin or wear high heels anymore?" The article came out the following week, titled, "The Mysterious Woman and the House Reviving Silver Creek." No one knew my real name. But a photo of me holding a blueprint, surrounded by laughing kids, spread faster than I expected. Within 3 days, I got an email from an architect in Albuquerque. She read the article and invited me to collaborate on a mobile library project for rural towns. And a few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter, with an old photo inside. It was from Rachel Granger, Caleb's ex-wife. "Emma," she wrote, "I see myself in your eyes. He once tried to erase me too. But I survived. And I believe you will too." I sat by the window of the small house, the sunset casting a warm red glow across the freshly polished wooden floor. Outside on the porch, children's laughter still echoed through the air. I knew I hadn't escaped Caleb completely. But now I had something he could never touch: a community. A home. A self more whole than ever before. I was reorganizing the little bookshelf in the corner of my studio when Haley came running in, panting. "Miss Emily. Someone just drove into town. Big silver car. They were asking for your art studio." I looked up, my hand freezing in the middle of a stack of books. It was a man. Dressed fancy. "Didn't sound like he was from around here," Haley continued. "Aunt Myra just pointed him this way and walked off." "Who is he?" I placed the notebook on the desk and stepped over to the window. On the dusty road that led to the edge of town, a shiny SUV had just pulled up in front of my old house. A man stepped out, white button-down shirt, dark sunglasses, brown leather shoes, completely out of place in the countryside, surrounded by sunshine and the scent of dry grass. I saw him from a distance. My chest didn't tremble, but there was a sharp ache under my ribs. "Caleb." I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the old phone, and tapped into the recording app I'd preset. Every instruction Harper had given me was etched into my mind. I walked to the door, not rushing, not hiding. "Hello, Caleb," I said before he could call my name. He spun around. Behind his sunglasses, his eyes darkened for a second. "Emma. So it's true. You're really here." I folded my arms, standing a few steps away. "My name is Emily Rivers now." Caleb took off his sunglasses and pressed his lips together. "We need to talk. Privately. About what you've done." "We can talk right here," I replied, voice calm. "Everything important is being recorded." He frowned, eyes scanning the area. No one was around. Just him and me, in front of the studio, surrounded by wildflowers and newly painted white walls. "You do realize what you're doing is illegal?" Caleb said quietly, voice sharp like a blade. "False identity. Civil evasion. You left your residence without notice, cut all contact, opened bank accounts under a fake name. You think you can hide forever?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him, letting him spill every word like he was lecturing a clueless child. "Now you're smearing my name?" he hissed. I saw the article. The mysterious woman. How ridiculous. "You've been hiding here while I faced rumors, questions from the bank, from investors. You think you're clever?" "Caleb," I said evenly. "I didn't run away. I was left. In a field. No phone. No wallet. No goodbye. That was because you wouldn't cooperate. You were making everything a mess. I just needed space." "For what?" I cut him off. "To change all the bank passwords?" File a missing person report. Forge the power of attorney to sell off assets. His face hardened. You can't prove anything. It's all just your word. I have lawyers. I have paperwork. I have medical records. I stepped back slightly, hand still in my pocket holding the phone. Medical records created by a doctor I never met. Diagnoses that don't match any real condition. And you submitted those to court as truth. Caleb clenched the leather strap of his shoulder bag. What you're doing now is obstruction. You could be arrested for false claims, defamation. No, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You're the one who broke the law. And I've already filed a counterclaim. My attorney Harper, Dean, has everything. Including this recording. He froze. His eyes darkened. Recording? I nodded. I've learned not to meet you empty-handed ever again. Silence settled for a moment. Caleb stepped back slightly, but tried to remain composed. What kind of joke are you playing here? Acting like some village art teacher, planting flowers, teaching kids to paint? How long do you think this will last? You don't belong here. You're an Austin woman, galas, design contracts. You're not the type to wear a straw hat and teach kids how to recycle paper. I smiled. You never really saw me. If you had, you'd know what I love, what I need. And today, I'm standing here not as your shadow, not living someone else's dream. Caleb said nothing. He turned away, walked to the SUV. But as he reached for the door, he looked back, genuine confusion flickering in his eyes. You'll regret not coming back. Everything I did was to protect our image. I didn't. Reply. I watched as the SUV turned around, kicking up red dust and sunlight, then vanished beyond the bend at the edge of town. I stopped the recording. Sent a copy straight to Harper's email. One day, a courtroom would listen to everything he just said. And this time, he wouldn't have anyone left to bend the truth for him. I returned to Texas on a gray April morning, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth. Harper met me at the airport, said little, handed me a cup of hot tea, and drove me to a hotel near the Travis County Courthouse. On the way, I sat quietly, watching familiar streets pass by. Every sign, every storefront stirred fragmented memories of a life I thought had been erased. The trial was scheduled for Monday. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but just full enough to make my chest tighten as I stepped in. Caleb was already there, seated at the defense table, his gray tailored suit and black tie immaculate, his face unreadable. But I saw the white-knuckled grip on the defense chair when our eyes met. The judge was Karen Whitmore, a woman in her 60s with short silver hair, a firm voice, and eyes that pierced through flowery arguments. She scanned the room before striking her gavel to open proceedings. I was the plaintiff, standing with Harper and her team. I didn't need to say much. Harper had it all covered. Your Honor, Harper began, we will demonstrate that Mr. Caleb Watson falsified legal documents to declare my client missing in order to illegally seize her lawfully owned property. Caleb sat still, occasionally whispering to his attorney, an older man with slicked hair and a convincing tone, but not sharp enough to bury the truth. Harper presented the evidence one by one. First was the email Caleb sent to the notary's office, attaching the false missing person declaration along with inaccurate medical descriptions. Then came the recording from Silver Creek, played aloud in the courtroom. Caleb's voice rang out clearly. I saw the article, the mysterious woman. How ridiculous. You've been hiding here while I dealt with the gossip. Then my voice followed. I didn't run away. I was left in a field. No phone. No wallet. No goodbye. Each sentence chipped away at the narrative Caleb had crafted. His head bowed, face reddening. Harper moved on to the bank accounts. Passwords changed, withdrawals made without my knowledge or consent. Caleb's lawyer objected, saying I had voluntarily let my husband handle finances. But Judge Whitmore simply flipped through the file, then looked directly at Caleb. Do you have proof that Mrs. Prescott granted you full control over her assets? The defense scrambled with their documents. Caleb swallowed hard. No one answered. The judge gave a slight nod. Proceed. Harper then presented copies of the forged documents, including a clumsy imitation of my signature on falsified medical forms, along with testimony from the doctor Caleb had bribed who had since withdrawn his statement under investigation. The air in the courtroom grew dense. I felt my chest tighten as Harper made her closing remark. Your Honor, my client was never missing. She was intentionally erased from the legal system through a series of grave offenses: document forgery, asset seizure, perjury, and deliberate destruction of a citizen's identity. Judge Whitmore sat in silence for a long moment. She placed her hand on the bench and looked directly at Caleb. Mr. Watson, she said slowly, this is not merely a legal violation. This is an act of erasing another human being's legal existence, someone who used to be your wife. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The court declares, Miss Emma Prescott was never missing. All attempts to transfer property are null and void. Mr. Caleb Watson is fined $120,000 in damages, in addition to 3 years of probation under supervision. The court also grants full retention of all personal and real property to Miss Prescott, including the tract near Lake Travis. I sat still, my fingers lightly gripping the arm of the chair. No tears, no smile. Just a steady breath, as if each inhale helped return a small piece of me, little parts that had been stolen, now finally falling back into place. Caleb stood motionless. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He turned and walked out of the courtroom in silence, his footsteps heavy against the cold tile floor. Harper gently placed her hand on mine. We did it. I nodded, unable to speak. I hadn't just won a case. I'd reclaimed my name, my voice, and more importantly, my right to exist in this world on my own terms. I didn't go back to Austin. Not because I was afraid. Not because I hated that city. But because I had finally understood something. Some doors, if forced open again, only lead us back into the past. A place where I had once quietly lost myself, piece by piece. After the trial, I returned to Silver Creek in silence. No celebration, no self-congratulations. Nothing that felt like a victory parade. I simply opened the door to my old studio, stepped into the sunlight filtering through the window panes, and sat down at my work table like any other afternoon. The kids still came every Saturday. Miss Ruthie still left a cup of hot coffee on the windowsill. Everything carried on as if no one had just walked out of a courtroom and claimed back their entire identity. A week later, I received a letter from the court office. The legal name change documents. From that moment forward, the name Emma Prescott became part of my personal history but no longer appeared in any official paperwork or signature. I was Emily Rivers now, not to hide, but to choose for myself the name that would walk beside the person I had become. On the wooden sign out front of the converted studio house, I painted a new inscription: Reclaim Studio, Rebuilding Space, Reclaiming Self. Below that, in smaller letters, Founder and Director, Emily Rivers. Harper was the first one to call and congratulate me. Beautiful name, she said, laughing. Strong, clear, like a fresh stream. A stream after the flood, I replied. She didn't ask anything more. Just emailed me an investment packet. I've got a friend in Sedona, Arizona. They're looking for someone to open a creative community space out in the desert. You interested? So, I held the printed plan in my hand, reading the descriptions of the vibrant red land, the sandstone rock, the dry air. I imagined little adobe homes, children who had never been given paintbrushes and walls to dream on, elders who had never sat down to share their life stories through charcoal and canvas. Harper, I said after a long pause, we're not opening a branch. We're growing a new limb. And so the expansion of Reclaim Studio began, a second space that would bloom in the middle of the desert, carrying the breath of Silver Creek but stretching in an entirely new direction. I never told anyone about the letter I received from Caleb's mother. It was a cream-colored envelope, no return address, delivered one early summer morning and placed on my work table by Miss Ruthie as I sorted sketches. You've got mail, she said, then walked away, asking no questions. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, elegant, slanted script, neatly penned. Emily, I don't ask for your forgiveness. I didn't write this to justify anything. I only want to tell you that I believed my son. And I was wrong. So wrong I can't make it right. I used to think Caleb was just ambitious. I didn't see, or I chose not to see, the control, the manipulation, and the way it broke every woman who entered his life. You weren't the first. And if you hadn't stood up, you might not have been the last. I met his ex-wife once, Rachel. It took her years to find herself again. When I saw your face in that article, I recognized the eyes. I'd seen them before in Rachel. You chose to hold on to yourself, Emily. And I, in what little time I have left, just want to offer you an apology, not for Caleb, but from a mother who blindly defended her son. May you live the rest of your life fully and truly. Margaret Watson. I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box beside the first sketches I ever drew in Silver Creek. No tears fell. No bitterness rose. Just a quiet peace inside. Because in the end, what I needed wasn't revenge. It was life, real life. With my name, my hands, my breath, and my own choices. And that is what I live each day now. No one will ever take that from me again. I returned to Austin on a pale autumn afternoon. The city was bathed in soft golden sunlight, the air less hurried than it had felt in years past. The taxi rolled through streets I used to know by heart. The cafe street where Caleb and I once had our morning coffee, the church corner where I nearly signed over everything I owned because I believed someone would never betray me. But this return wasn't for memories. I hadn't come to face the past. I came to finish something I chose to do. With no pressure. No one else deciding for me. Harper had the paperwork ready. The condo in downtown, the last portion of the shared estate, was now officially mine, awarded after the court ruling. I signed the contract to sell the condo at market price. No bargaining, no sentiment. The contract was nearly 20 pages long. But I didn't read every line like I once did. I had learned to focus on what mattered, who I was signing as, and why I was signing at all. I asked for half of the funds from the sale to be directed to a nonprofit organization in Dallas that supports women who've suffered psychological abuse, an organization Harper once told me about. A place for women like me, who once lost their voices in lives that looked peaceful on the meat of fire, and outside. The representative from the foundation held my hand for a long moment when she received the check. She didn't ask why. She just looked into my eyes and said, "Thank you for turning your wounds into healing for others." I left Austin the very next morning. Didn't stop by any old places. Didn't leave a forwarding address. The trip ended like a quiet period at the end of a chapter that had finally been written. I didn't look back. There was no need to anymore. 3 weeks later, Reclaim Studio held its first exhibition in Silver Creek. We set up an open-air space on a grassy lot beside the library, a place that used to be overgrown with weeds and scattered with broken benches. Now, strings of warm yellow lights stretched from one wooden post to another. The display tables were handmade, painted by the local kids and residents of the town. There were sketches for a mobile library in Arizona, concept drawings of Miss Myra's experimental garden, and color palettes by little Haley, the girl I had just taught how to hold a paintbrush a few months ago. I wore a cream linen dress, soft-soled shoes like the ones I used when teaching, my hair neatly tied back. I didn't stand on a stage. I simply walked among the crowd, greeting each person, asking how they felt, listening to their stories. When I turned toward the cardboard model of Silver Creek, I saw the bright smile of Lucas, the little boy who once asked if he could put a slide in his bedroom. Today he was in a crisp white shirt, proudly holding a watercolor drawing of his grandmother's house. "Miss Emily," Lucas called out. "I added a bathtub in the backyard. Did you see it?" I leaned down to look at the drawing and nodded. "I saw it. And I think it's the best idea here." Lucas beamed and wrapped his arms around me in a warm, honest hug, the kind only children can give without hesitation. At that moment, the noise around me seemed to fade into the background. I stood in the tenture by soft afternoon sunlight, surrounded by laughter and voices, as pieces of the past were slowly being replaced by something real, something joyful that didn't require me to pretend to be okay. I was no longer the woman who once trembled in the middle of a barren Texas field. No longer the shadow forgotten behind a steering wheel. No longer the person who held her breath every time she heard a car door slam shut. I am Emily Rivers. I am the one who rebuilt my life, brick by broken brick, with hands that once shook in the dark. Not for revenge. Not to prove anything to anyone. but simply to exist fully, truthfully, and freely in a world I chose for myself. Caleb once thought he could throw me away in a place no one had ever heard of, then come back when I was broken and drag me home like a lost possession. But it was in that very place that I found myself. And I will never go back to who I used to be. What do you think of the journey I've been through? If it were you, would you have the courage to stand up after being betrayed by the person you loved most? To start again from nothing, no name, no money, no place to turn? I don't blame those who've fallen. I just want to share this with you. Sometimes, what we need most isn't revenge, but a quiet space to hear our own voice again, and a warm community where we can start over without shame for our scars. If you've ever gone through a dark season in life, I hope you know this: you are not alone. And no matter how hard someone may have tried to erase you, your worth still exists clearly, fully, and beyond the reach of anyone to take away. Feel free to share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you've overcome or how you hope to rise again. And if this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue exploring more powerful journeys, ordinary lives filled with extraordinary strength. Within the families, communities, and everyday moments we all live in. Because sometimes, it's the smallest stories that hold the beginning of a life truly worth living.